The endless void stretched before Ethan Cole like a cold, unyielding canvas of ink, speckled with the faint and distant lights of stars, too far to warm a soul. He leaned back in the pilot's seat of the Artemis, a vessel as worn and weathered as the man himself. The cockpit hummed softly, filled with the faint scent of recycled air and the steady rhythm of blinking indicators. Ethan's hands hovered over the controls, calloused fingers brushing familiar dials as he studied the anomaly on his scanner, a faint signal, faint but unmistakable. "Unknown object, 10 clicks ahead," chimed the ship's onboard AI, a voice crisp and indifferent. "Minimal heat signatures detected. Potential debris field." "Debris," Ethan muttered, his tone skeptical. He adjusted the Artemis's trajectory, his eyes narrowing as the signal resolved into a clearer picture on his monitors. The wreck floated in silence, silhouetted against the distant glow of a dying nebula. Its edges were jagged, warped by the violent forces that had torn it apart. The hull bore scorch marks, deep and deliberate, evidence of weapon fire rather than the random misfortune of the void. Ethan's gut tightened. Wrecks weren't uncommon this far out in the rim, this lonely graveyard of forgotten ambitions and unsanctioned trades. But something about this one was different. His salvage instincts prickled, the feeling he couldn't name but had long since learned to trust. He activated the exterior floodlights, bathing the derelict in stark artificial light. The ship's name and origin were obliterated, scorched clean from the hull. A bad sign. No identifiers meant someone wanted this vessel erased, its existence denied. "Scan for life signs," he ordered, his voice low. "Commencing scan." The AI paused. Anomaly detected. One faint biosignature located in the lower quadrant of the vessel. Ethan frowned. A survivor? Out here? The signal was so weak it barely registered, like a flickering candle in the wind. Most salvagers wouldn't bother. They'd mark it as scrap and move on. But Ethan wasn't most salvagers. He suited up in silence, the hiss of pressurized seals filling the cabin as he secured his helmet. The HUD in his visor flickered to life, syncing with the Artemis and overlaying data streams onto his view. His pulse quickened as he stepped into the airlock, the hatch groaning open to reveal the black maw of space beyond. The tether snapped taut as he drifted toward the wreck. His gloved hands gripped the edges of a torn hatch, the metal cold even through the insulated material. A flick of his wrist activated the cutting torch, and he carved his way inside, the glow of molten steel briefly illuminating the darkness. The interior was a tomb. Twisted beams jutted out at odd angles, jagged and sharp. The floor was littered with debris, shattered panels, loose wires sparking faintly. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the sound of his breathing, magnified within his helmet. "Artemis," he whispered, his voice almost swallowed by the void. "I'm in. Anything else on the scanners?" "Biosignature remains consistent, approximately 30 meters to your east." Ethan moved cautiously, the narrow corridor forcing him to weave around fallen beams and ruptured conduits. He paused at intervals, sweeping his light across the walls. Strange markings caught his eye, etchings scorched into the metal. They looked deliberate, almost ceremonial, though their meaning eluded him. The air grew colder as he approached the source of the signal. His suit's sensors detected no atmosphere, yet an unsettling sensation prickled his skin, as though he were being watched. He forced the thought aside and pressed on, his light finally settling on the shattered remains of what appeared to be a cryo chamber. Inside was a figure. Ethan froze, his breath catching. She lay crumpled amidst the wreckage, her body unnaturally still. Her skin shimmered, a cascade of iridescent hues that shifted as the light played across her form. She was humanoid, but not human, her features delicate, almost ethereal, with faintly glowing veins coursing beneath her translucent skin. Her chest rose and fell in shallow breaths, barely perceptible. "Artemis," Ethan murmured, his voice shaking. "I've got someone, female, definitely not human." Analyzing. The AI's response was swift, clinical. Species unknown. Signs of physical trauma detected. Biosignature unstable. Ethan crouched beside her, his gloved hand hovering uncertainly above her shoulder. Her scales were cool to the touch, their texture smooth but alien. As he lifted her into his arms, her body twitched, her eyes fluttering open for a brief moment. Her gaze locked onto his, and for an instant he felt an overwhelming rush of something he couldn't explain, a collision of emotions, foreign and raw. Her lips parted, and she whispered a single word, barely audible over the static in his comms. "Run." The word sent a jolt of fear through him. He turned sharply, scanning the corridor behind him, but it remained as empty and silent as before. Yet the feeling persisted, an oppressive weight, a tension in the air that hadn't been there moments ago. He secured her to his harness and began the arduous trek back to the Artemis. The ship felt different now, heavier with every step. When he finally reached the airlock and sealed it behind him, he exhaled a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. But as he laid her on the medbay table and began stabilizing her condition, the unease lingered. The faint glow of her scales illuminated the room, casting strange shadows that seemed to dance on the walls. Ethan looked down at her, the weight of the mystery settling over him like a shroud. Who was she? Why had she been drifting alone in a dead ship? And what, exactly, had she meant by run? He didn't have answers yet, but as the Artemis hummed softly around him, he had the unsettling sense that he wasn't alone. Something had followed them from the wreck, something unseen, waiting. The medbay aboard the Artemis was a dim, sterile space, a stark contrast to the mess of jagged debris outside the ship. Ethan hovered over the alien woman's still form, the soft hiss of life support systems filling the silence. Her condition had stabilized after his efforts, but her eyes remained closed, her breath shallow, rhythmic. There was a strange tranquility in her stillness, but beneath it, the tension gnawed at Ethan's gut, pulling at him with an insistent, almost primal force. The mystery was suffocating. He had known space would be lonely out here, but not like this. Not this unsettling quiet. Not this silence that carried too much weight. The feeling hadn't left him since he'd pulled her from the wreckage. There was something about the way her eyes locked onto his before she spoke, something raw and unspoken, like a warning or a plea he hadn't understood. "Artemis," he muttered, leaning over to check the ship's status. "Any new readings?" "Negative. All systems functioning within nominal parameters," the AI responded. Its monotone voice failed to mask a hint of unease. "However, I have detected several anomalous signals near your current location, high-frequency interference, spiking at irregular intervals." The hairs on the back of Ethan's neck stood at attention. He straightened up and peered through the small window that overlooked the starry void. Nothing, just the endless black dotted with distant points of light. But there was something in the air, a feeling he couldn't shake, a tension that gnawed at his very bones. The woman stirred, her hand twitching on the table. Ethan's eyes snapped to her face, his pulse quickening. Her eyelids fluttered, the soft pulse of her iridescent skin glowing faintly. Slowly, her eyes opened. Amber eyes, not the cold, calculating amber of an animal, but the soft, warm gaze of someone who had seen too much. For a long moment, she just stared at him, the silence between them palpable, thick with the weight of unspoken words. Then, her voice came again, low and breathless, but undeniably urgent. "Where am I?" "You're safe." Ethan's voice was steady, though his mind raced. "You're on the Artemis, a salvage ship." He didn't know why he felt compelled to reassure her. After all, she wasn't human. But something about her, about the way she carried herself even in her weakened state, made him feel protective, like she was more than just a survivor of some forgotten wreck. She shifted, grimacing slightly as her body protested the movement. "No, not safe," she whispered, her voice edged with something darker. She blinked, her eyes clouding over for a second, like she was struggling to remember something vital. Then she focused again. "You need to leave. Now." Ethan's heart skipped. What's happening? Her breath caught in her throat. The Praxis order. They'll come for me. They're already coming. Who? His voice was low, his hand steady as he checked her vitals again. But the mention of a faction, the Praxis order, was enough to stoke the embers of fear that had been smoldering in the back of his mind since the moment he found her. She stared at him with a piercing intensity, her gaze like an ember in the dark. The Dominion. They hunt my kind. Her voice dropped to a whisper. They'll destroy you if they know you helped me. Ethan's mind whirled. The word Dominion sounded familiar, but the context eluded him. He had heard rumors, whispers in dark corners of spaceports, but those had always been stories, tales of a massive intergalactic empire. Nothing concrete, nothing to worry about, nothing to believe. But here she was, alive, and with a warning that didn't sound like the fevered ramblings of someone desperate. It was as if she knew the universe in ways that made her words ring with terrifying certainty. Suddenly, the soft whine of a ship's engines in the distance caught his attention. Ethan's pulse quickened as he turned, looking out through the small viewport. His stomach dropped when he saw it. A dark shape, sleek and imposing, had entered the outer rim of the system. A ship, too large, too precise to be a simple freighter or independent salvage vessel. The silhouette was unmistakable. A Praxis warship. How long? Ethan rasped. She closed her eyes briefly, her lips pressing together in a thin line. When she spoke, her voice was steady, but laden with the weight of inevitability. They'll be here in less than 30 minutes. Ethan's heart thundered in his chest as he rushed to the console, his fingers moving quickly over the controls. The Artemis had powerful engines, but against a Praxis ship, it was nothing more than a speck in the void. He had no illusions about his chances of escape, no illusions about anything. His hand hovered over the comm panel, a decision pressing on him. If he sent a distress signal, if he called for help, it could be a trap. The Praxis could intercept it, could track him to this very spot. And what would he say? That he had a wounded alien on board? That he had no idea what the hell was going on, but that they were in danger? Number. He would need to think. Fast. Ethan, she said, her voice breaking through his thoughts. You don't have much time. You can't outrun them. He met her gaze, a knot tightening in his chest. Then what? There is a place, she said, a flicker of something dark crossing her face. A sector outside of their reach. I can give you the coordinates, but you have to trust me. She was asking him to risk it all, to put his faith in someone whose species had brought nothing but chaos and danger into his life. But even as the thought passed through his mind, Ethan realized he had no choice. He had already made this choice the moment he decided to pull her from the wreckage. He nodded slowly, his jaw clenched, as he turned to input the coordinates into the nav system. The Praxis ship was getting closer, its silhouette now filling the viewport, its massive hull like a looming shadow. I trust you, he said, his voice rough, though the words tasted bitter on his tongue. The moment the words left his mouth, he knew they would change everything, perhaps irrevocably. The Artemis surged to life beneath him, the engines firing up with a violent roar as the stars ahead blurred. Ethan guided the ship toward the coordinates Lyrina had provided, hoping against hope that this wasn't another trap. But as the Praxis ship drew nearer, he couldn't shake the feeling that he had already crossed a line. There was no going back now. The chase had begun, and there would be no winners in this game. The Artemis shook violently, throwing Ethan into the pilot's seat with a bone-rattling jolt. The ship's alarm system screamed at him, its shrill noise filling the cockpit with urgency. Outside the viewport, the Praxis warship loomed large, an impenetrable wall of shadow that consumed the stars around it. It was closing in fast, faster than Ethan had anticipated. The calm, steady hum of his ship's engines turned into a whine, then a roar as he pushed the throttle to its limit, the Artemis shuddering under the strain. Artemis, what's the status on the engines? Ethan barked, his fingers flying over the control panel. The ship was straining, the outer hull groaning in protest as they tore through space. Engines are at maximum output, but we're still being pursued. Praxis warship is within 20 clicks. Approaching weapons range. The AI's response was mechanical, detached, almost too calm for the situation at hand. Ethan's pulse quickened, the weight of his decision crashing down on him. He had known they were running out of time, but the reality of it, the impending storm of destruction that loomed behind him, was something he wasn't ready for. The Praxis weren't just hunters. They were executioners. He could feel their presence now, like a shadow spreading across the very fabric of space, suffocating everything in its path. He glanced over at the medbay. Lyrina was still unconscious, her body limp on the table, but he could see the faint pulse of light flickering beneath her skin, an eerie glow that seemed to pulse in sync with the ship's own frantic energy. He didn't know how much longer she could hold on, how much longer either of them could hold on. "What now?" he muttered to himself, his eyes darting back to the controls. The Praxis ship was relentless. He wasn't going to outrun it. There was no way. The AI chimed in again, this time with a hint of something resembling alarm. "Unidentified object detected, closing in fast. It's a small ship, too fast for conventional scans." Ethan's heart skipped a beat. Another ship? Not the Praxis, please not the Praxis. His mind raced through every possibility, every nightmare scenario, but there was no time to process them. He toggled the radar system, and a new blip appeared on the screen, moving at an impossibly high speed, cutting through the void with precision. Whatever it was coming straight for them. "Who the hell is that?" Ethan demanded, sweat beading on his forehead as he shifted the Artemis into evasive maneuvers. The last thing he needed was another ship, another unknown force complicating their already desperate flight. The AI responded, its voice tinged with the same unease that was rising in Ethan's chest. "The ship is now within range. It's broadcasting a single message. Priority code, unknown. Message reads, 'Lyrina, we've come for you. Your time is running out.'" Ethan's blood ran cold. The voice in the message was unfamiliar, clipped, and devoid of emotion. But the words, they were unmistakable. "Lyrina," he whispered under his breath, turning toward the medbay once more. This was no coincidence. Someone was tracking her. Someone else had found her. And then the world seemed to tilt. Without warning, the Artemis lurched violently, a wrenching force pulling at the ship as an impact struck its hull. Sparks flew from the console, and the artificial gravity systems flickered, throwing Ethan into a tumble. His stomach lurched as the ship careened wildly. "Brace for impact," the AI snapped, but it was too late. A searing blast of energy slammed into the Artemis, sending the ship spiraling through the blackness. Ethan slammed his hands against the console, his body jerked forward by the unrelenting force, and for a heart-stopping moment, everything went dark. When his senses returned, the world was a spinning blur. The hum of the ship was gone, replaced by an eerie silence. The lights flickered weakly, casting long shadows across the control panel. Ethan's breath was ragged as he pushed himself up, feeling the ache of bruised ribs and the sting of scraped skin. His hands gripped the controls with white-knuckled desperation as he pulled the ship out of its uncontrolled descent, forcing the Artemis back into some semblance of stability. The Praxis warship had stopped its pursuit. For the briefest moment, it was as if the universe had held its breath. But it didn't last. A sharp metallic hiss filled the cockpit as the communication system flared to life. The message was brief, cold, and deliberate. "You are a fool, salvage operator." Ethan's pulse quickened. He knew that voice. It was the same one that had spoken through the unknown ship's broadcast, the same one that had sent the chilling message for Lyrina. Whoever this was, they were part of something far bigger than anything he had imagined, something far more dangerous. "Who are you?" Ethan demanded, his voice hoarse but defiant. "What do you want?" The reply was immediate, its tone sharp, as if the speaker had been waiting for him to ask. "It is not what we want, Ethan Cole. It is what she wants. The fugitive is no longer your responsibility. You will hand her over immediately, or we will destroy you." Ethan's grip tightened on the control panel. His mind raced as his eyes darted to the medbay. Lyrina was still unconscious, her life hanging by a fragile thread. The Praexis, they, wanted her, and they would stop at nothing to get her. The message ended, leaving only the disquieting hum of the ship's failing systems as a reminder of the danger closing in on him. Ethan's chest tightened as he looked at the viewport. The Praexis warship had positioned itself just out of direct weapon range, but it wasn't retreating. Instead, it was waiting, patient, calculating. He could almost feel its looming presence, like a predator watching its prey with unnerving patience. He turned back to the medbay, a sense of finality settling over him. There was no escape, not from the warship, not from the forces now circling them like vultures. His choices had led him here, and there was no going back. But there was one thing he could control. He glanced down at Lyrina, her delicate features barely visible in the dim light. The weight of the decision pressed down on him like an anchor, dragging him deeper into a world of danger and deceit. If he handed her over, the Praexis would end her life, along with anyone who stood in their way. But if he fought back... A cold resolve settled in Ethan's chest. "I'm not giving you up," he whispered to the unconscious woman. "Not without a fight." And for the first time since he had pulled her from the wreckage, Ethan felt the stirrings of something that had long been absent in his life, a sense of purpose, a resolve that burned hotter than the fear gnawing at his insides. The chase was no longer a matter of survival. It was a battle for something far greater, something that could change the fate of the galaxy itself. The lights flickered again, casting an uneven glow over the cockpit of the Artemis. The hum of the ship's engines was irregular now, its heart beating in fractured rhythms as the battle for survival raged outside the hull. Ethan's knuckles were white around the controls, his grip unyielding despite the strain. The Praxis warship hovered at the edges of his radar, a silent, predatory monolith in the void. He was running out of time. It wasn't just the ship. It wasn't just the warship looming outside. The walls of the Artemis seemed to close in around him, the air growing thicker with every passing second. There was something inside him, a quiet terror, something he hadn't acknowledged until now, the growing realization that he was in over his head, that his decisions, reckless as they had been, had led him into something far darker than he could have ever imagined. He glanced at the medbay. Lyrina still lay unconscious, her breath shallow and erratic, though her body had healed enough to survive the trauma of the wreck. But something in her face, something in her expression, had changed. A faint trace of fear had seeped into her features, the same fear that had lived in him ever since he'd made the fateful choice to save her. "Lyrina," he whispered, more to himself than to her. "What have I gotten myself into?" Her species was beyond anything he had imagined. Psychic abilities, technology that could bend the fabric of reality itself, and a past mired in war and bloodshed. She was more than just an alien. She was the key to a conflict that spanned the stars, a war between civilizations, a struggle for control that had only begun to reveal its true scope. And yet, even with everything he knew, there were still questions, mysteries that refused to resolve themselves. Ethan had no answers, no real plan. He was a salvage operator, not a hero, not a soldier. But there was one thing he did know for certain. There was no going back. Not now. The comm system crackled to life, shattering the tension in the air like a thunderclap. "Ethan Cole!" The voice on the other end was cold, clipped, its authority unmistakable. "You are being given one final opportunity to surrender the fugitive. Stand down, or we will eliminate you and your ship." It was the same voice as before, the one that had sent the chilling message. The Praexis. They were waiting, patient. But Ethan had no intention of making it easy for them. "You think I'm just going to hand her over?" Ethan's voice was hoarse but steady. He didn't know why he said it. He didn't care anymore. He wasn't going to back down. Not for her. Not for himself. "You have no choice." The voice cut through the air like a blade. "She is a threat to the stability of the galaxy. Her capture is imperative. Do not make us do this the hard way. Ethan slammed his fist against the control panel, frustration rising like bile in his throat. I don't care what you think you're going to do, he spat. I'm not giving her up. You want to fight? Fine, you'll get one. The line went silent. In that moment, as the tension between him and the voice on the other end stretched taut, like a wire ready to snap, something shifted in the Artemis. The ship's systems flickered, and for a moment, the stars outside were obscured by a strange, shimmering haze. Ethan froze, his heart pounding in his chest. What was happening? Was this some kind of Praexis weapon? Some trick to disorient him? He looked down at the panel, but the readings were all distorted. Nothing made sense. And then, just as suddenly, the haze cleared. The ship's systems returned to normal, and the stars outside reappeared, shining like distant beacons. But they weren't the same stars. Ethan's eyes widened in disbelief. They had jumped. In a flash, the Artemis had crossed an unimaginable distance, light years perhaps, into an area of space he didn't recognize. The quiet void outside the ship was different now. There were no familiar constellations, no recognizable patterns in the stars. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. What the hell? He muttered, his mind spinning as he scrambled to understand what had just happened. The comm crackled again. Do not be alarmed, Ethan Cole. We are in the place of no return now. The voice was colder than ever, but there was something else in it now, a certainty, a sense of finality. What do you want from me? Ethan asked, his words sharp with a growing panic. The response was chilling, the finality of it sinking into his bones. What we want is her, and you, Ethan Cole, are the key to finding her. The line went dead. Ethan's mind was spinning, his thoughts too wild to capture. 1,000 different questions, 1,000 different truths collided inside his head. How had they known? How had the Praexis managed to track them across the stars? And why had the ship, his ship, jumped? The Artemis wasn't equipped for long-range travel, let alone instantaneous jumps through space, and then it hit him, Lyrina. The only explanation was her. Somehow her powers, her presence, had triggered the jump. Her species, her abilities, they were unlike anything he had encountered before. She had known this was coming, hadn't she? That's why she had been so adamant about escaping, about hiding. She wasn't just fleeing from her enemies, she had been running from something far worse. And now, Ethan was entangled in it. He had been dragged into a web far larger than himself, a game he had never intended to play. But as the truth settled into him, a cold determination filled the empty spaces. There was no going back. If he ran now, they would never stop hunting them. They had already come too far. Lyrina, he whispered, turning to look at her, though she was still unconscious. The faint glow beneath her skin had dimmed. What are you? The truth of it was clear now. She wasn't just a fugitive. She was the key to something much larger. A secret, a power that even the Praexis feared. She held the answers. And somehow Ethan had become part of the story, whether he was ready for it or not. The stakes had been raised, and the only way forward was through. Ethan took a deep breath, his fingers hovering over the controls, preparing himself for what lay ahead. He wasn't just fighting for survival anymore. He was fighting for something bigger. Lyrina might hold the key to unraveling the web of deceit and war that had been spun around them, but he had no illusions left. He had to make a choice. And it wasn't just about saving her anymore. It was about saving himself, and perhaps even the entire galaxy, from the forces now closing in on them. As the stars outside flickered and twisted, the Artemis drifted into the unknown, and Ethan braced himself for whatever came next. He knew the Praexis were not the only threat they faced, but as the ship hurtled deeper into the void, one thing became undeniably clear. Everything he thought he knew about the galaxy, and himself, was about to be shattered. There would be no easy answers. There would be no guarantees. The only thing he could trust now was the fragile alliance he had formed with Lyrina, and the strength he would need to forge ahead. There was no turning back. The mysteries had only just begun. The Artemis drifted, the silence pressing in like a weight. Ethan Cole sat at the helm, his hands gripping the controls, though the ship no longer required his input. The battle was over. The war was just beginning. Outside the viewport, the void stretched endlessly, a boundless sea of stars and nothingness, so vast it made the heart feel small. Ethan's thoughts, however, were consumed by the woman who lay in the medbay, her pale skin now shimmering with faint energy, almost ethereal in the dim light. Lyrina had awoken long ago, but their words had been few. The truths they had uncovered in the last few hours had shaken them both, and neither was ready to speak of them fully yet. The Praxis were gone, but not defeated, and there were others who now knew their names, others who would stop at nothing to claim the secret they both guarded. Ethan's fingers twitched at the edge of the console as a familiar voice filled the cockpit. "Ethan." It was Lyrina's voice, weak but steady. He turned in his seat, his heart tightening at the sight of her. She was sitting up now, her face gaunt but resolved, her iridescent skin pulsing with energy. "You're awake," he said softly, though the words felt inadequate. She nodded, but her eyes were distant. "The Praxis were only a part of it," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "You've seen the truth now, Ethan. You understand what's at stake." He swallowed hard, feeling the weight of everything he had learned. The Praxis, with their cold, calculating minds, had been hunting her for one reason: power. Lyrina wasn't just an innocent fugitive. She was a weapon, the last of her kind, the keeper of knowledge that could reshape the galaxy. "Tell me," he urged, stepping closer. His voice was a thread of desperation. He needed to understand, needed her to explain it all before it tore them apart. "What exactly are you?" Lyrina closed her eyes, drawing in a long, slow breath. When she spoke again, her words were laden with the gravity of centuries of conflict. "I am one of the Narikoth, an ancient race, lost to time and forgotten by history. My people once ruled the stars with technology that bent the very fabric of reality, creating worlds, shaping life, and controlling time itself. But we were betrayed. An enemy faction, led by the Praxis, destroyed us." Ethan felt his breath catch in his throat. This was bigger than he had imagined, bigger than he had ever been prepared for. His mind raced, trying to piece together the fragments of information that Lyrina had shared. The Praxis weren't just conquerors. They were thieves. Thieves of knowledge, of power. "The knowledge you hold," Ethan said, his voice strained. "That's why they want you." Lyrina nodded. "They're not after me alone, Ethan. They want the Narikoth's legacy, the weapons, the knowledge we hid away. If they succeed, they'll conquer not just this galaxy, but the entire universe. They'll become unstoppable." Ethan's mind reeled. He had stumbled into something far beyond salvage work, something far beyond what he could ever have imagined. But there was no denying it now. He was part of it. He was in it. And if he wanted to survive, if he wanted to save not just Lyrina, but everything he held dear, there was only one choice left. "You're going to fight them," Ethan said, more as a statement than a question. Her eyes met his, and for the first time, he saw the flicker of hope in them, the same hope he had seen when she had first awakened. She was no longer just a fugitive. She was a warrior. She had always been one. And now, so was he. "I can't do it alone," Lyrina said, her voice steady but burdened with the weight of her past. "And neither can you." Ethan stepped forward, his resolve hardening. The path ahead was unclear, filled with danger and uncertainty. But one thing was certain. He wasn't going to let her face it alone. He wasn't going to let them win. "There's no going back now," he said, his voice low but firm. "We fight together. We take the fight to them." Lyrina's gaze softened for a moment, her eyes reflecting a deep gratitude that cut through the confusion and fear. "We will need allies," she whispered. "The Praxis aren't the only ones who want the knowledge we carry. There are others who would stop them, others who have been watching." Ethan nodded, understanding the gravity of her words. The war was far from over, but at least now they had a chance. The final confrontation had been inevitable. As the Artemis soared deeper into the unknown reaches of space, the Praxis warships closed in on them once more. But this time, there was no fear in Ethan's heart. This time, he had a purpose. The Artemis was no longer just a transport ship. It had become a vessel of defiance, a symbol of resistance against an enemy that had threatened to consume everything. The stars beyond the hull shimmered, like 1,000 eyes watching them, knowing that what they did next would decide the fate of all. As the Praxis ships surrounded them, their weapons charging, Ethan set his jaw. He knew what had to be done. The technology Lorena carried could turn the tide in an instant, if they could just get close enough to use it. He glanced at her, seeing the strength that had returned to her eyes. She was ready. The countdown began. "Are you ready?" he asked, his voice steady despite the storm that raged outside. Lorena nodded. "I am." Ethan's hand hovered over the firing controls. In that moment, he realized that this was the culmination of everything he had feared and hoped for. This wasn't just about saving one life. This was about saving the future. The power that Lyrina held, her people's knowledge, their legacy, was the key to rewriting the galaxy's future. They could either use it to save or destroy everything. And as the Praxis advanced, all he could do was trust her. "Let's end this," he said. With a final press of the button, the Artemis unleashed a brilliant surge of energy, a force so powerful it tore through the Praxis ships like paper, disintegrating their weapons, their shields, their very foundations. The enemy was obliterated in a blinding flash. The silence that followed was deafening, and in the quiet aftermath, Ethan finally allowed himself a breath of relief. He had done it. They had done it. They had won. But as he turned to look at Lyrina, he knew this was only the beginning. The galaxy had been saved, but the war for the stars was far from over. There would be more battles to fight, more choices to make, and new enemies to face. But they had each other, and for the first time since that fateful salvage mission, Ethan felt as though he had found his place in the universe. The journey had come full circle, and though the road ahead was still uncertain, he knew one thing for sure. He wasn't alone. Not anymore. The Aegis Dawn emerged from the void of hyperspace, its matte hull reflecting faint starlight as it slowed to sublight speeds. The planet Eurynome 4 hung below, a mottled orb of green and gray, wrapped in the shroud of a gasping atmosphere that struggled to cling to its surface. Marcus Ellis sat in the pilot's seat, his eyes fixed on the readings flickering across the console. He had done dozens of these survey missions, enough to know that the faint signatures he was picking up weren't normal. The decay was too regular, too deliberate, as if someone or something had been toying with the sensors. He glanced at the ship's AI interface, Astra, which chimed softly in the dimly lit cockpit. "Atmospheric composition is within tolerable limits," Astra announced in her clipped mechanical tone. However, scans indicate anomalous energy readings concentrated in Sector 12 of the primary colony complex. Suggest caution during approach. "Caution's my middle name," Marcus muttered, leaning back in his seat and running a hand through his cropped brown hair. His face bore the wear of someone who had spent too many months in deep space, lines etched by the soft glare of distant stars. "Anomalous energy readings, huh? That's a polite way of saying get ready for weird." He eased the Aegis Dawn into the planet's upper atmosphere, the hull trembling faintly as it sliced through layers of thin air. Below, the colony came into view, a sprawling network of structures nestled in a valley, their once sleek designs now overrun with alien flora. Massive domes of shattered glass glinted in the waning sunlight, and skeletal frames of long-abandoned towers reached skyward, as if grasping for rescue that had never come. "Time of abandonment?" Marcus asked, already knowing the answer, but needing to fill the silence. "Colony designated abandoned 87 standard years ago," Astra replied. "Population, 9,642 at the time of the outbreak. No survivors recorded. Marcus exhaled sharply, the weight of history pressing against him. Eurynomy 4 was a ghost story in the archives, a cautionary tale of hubris and the fragility of life on the edge of the galaxy. The plague that had swept through its corridors had defied explanation, its origins as much a mystery as its victims. Yet something still lingered here, something alive. He brought the ship down in a clearing near the colony's outer edge, where crumbling walls had collapsed into piles of moss-covered rubble. As the engines hummed into silence, he unstrapped himself and grabbed his gear, a lightweight exosuit, a plasma torch, and a scanner slung over his shoulder. The airlock hissed open, and the planet's atmosphere rushed in, a heady mix of damp earth and something sharper, almost metallic. Marcus hesitated for a moment before stepping out onto the uneven ground, the soles of his boots crunching against shards of glass and brittle vegetation. The colony was silent, but not in the way of an empty building. It was the silence of something waiting. The first hours were uneventful, almost mundane. Marcus moved through the colony's outskirts, recording data and cataloging his findings. The structures bore the scars of rapid evacuation, overturned furniture, scattered personal belongings, and walls scrawled with desperate messages in fading paint. Stay inside. Don't let it see you. Forgive us. It wasn't supposed to be this way. The words made Marcus's skin crawl, though he tried to shrug it off. Every abandoned colony had its share of panic-stricken graffiti, a final testament to the chaos that marked its end. But the deeper he ventured, the stranger it became. He found a laboratory that had been gutted from the inside, its equipment reduced to twisted metal and shattered glass. Yet, in the center of the room, a single console remained intact, glowing faintly with power. Marcus knelt before it, brushing away layers of dust to reveal the Xylith script etched along its edges, a language he had only seen in archival footage. "This shouldn't be here," he whispered, his voice swallowed by the stillness. The Xylith were a legend, their culture obliterated centuries ago, their artifacts traded on black markets for fortunes. Finding a working console in a human colony wasn't just unusual, it was impossible. He activated his scanner, its interface blinking with confusion as it struggled to interpret the device. The console hummed to life, casting an eerie blue glow across the room. A fragmented hologram flickered above it, showing a figure, tall, slender, with elongated limbs and shimmering skin. Marcus's breath caught as the figure turned, its face obscured but unmistakably alien. Before he could process what he was seeing, the lights in the laboratory flickered. The hum of the console grew louder, almost a growl, and Marcus felt a pressure building in the air, like the world itself was holding its breath. And then he heard it, a voice, not spoken but in his mind, soft, resonant, and undeniably foreign. "You've come," it said, each word laced with an aching sadness. At last. Marcus spun around, his hand instinctively reaching for the plasma torch at his side. The room was empty, but the voice persisted, weaving through his thoughts like a melody he couldn't escape. "Who's there?" he demanded, his voice trembling despite himself. The answer came not in words, but in a sensation, a presence drawing him deeper into the colony. It was neither a command nor a suggestion. It was a pull, as though the very air had taken him by the hand and led him forward. He followed, his steps slow and deliberate, until he reached the heart of the colony. A vast biodome, its glass panels fractured but still intact enough to hold the atmosphere. Inside, bioluminescent plants glowed with an unnatural light, casting shifting patterns on the floor. And there, standing in the center, was the source of the voice. She was tall, her skin shimmering like liquid silver, her eyes deep pools of luminous blue. Her presence was both serene and unnerving, as if she didn't fully belong to the world around her. "I've waited for you," she said, her voice resonating directly in his mind. Marcus took a cautious step forward, his instincts screaming at him to run, but his curiosity anchoring him in place. "Who are you?" he asked. "And what the hell is going on here?" The woman tilted her head, her gaze steady. "I am Zara," she said, "the last of my kind." Her words hung in the air like a challenge, daring Marcus to uncover the truth. Marcus stood motionless, his eyes fixed on Zara as she stood in the center of the biodome. Her presence seemed to warp the very air around her, the soft hum of the colony's dying systems fading into the background as her shimmering form filled his vision. The words she'd spoken, "the last of my kind," lingered in his mind, echoing like a distant chime. He wanted to ask more, to demand answers to the questions swirling in his head. Who was she really? How had she survived here for so long? And why had she waited for him? But before he could speak, Zara raised a hand, her fingers delicate and ethereal, as though her very touch could shatter the air. "Do not ask questions yet, Marcus Ellis," she said, her voice so soft and melodic that it seemed to resonate directly in his thoughts. "First, I must show you what remains." A sense of foreboding filled the air, the temperature in the biodome dropping by a few degrees, as if to signal the shift in the atmosphere. Zara turned, her movements fluid and graceful, leading Marcus deeper into the dome. He followed her, unease creeping up his spine with every step. The plants that once had seemed benign now appeared more ominous in the growing darkness. Their bioluminescence cast strange, flickering shadows against the walls of the structure. The sounds of the colony, once silent, seemed to pulse with an underlying rhythm, like a heart beating in the shadows. They stopped at the base of a large alien console, its surface etched with intricate designs that Marcus could not hope to understand. It hummed with a low, almost imperceptible energy. Zara placed a hand on the console, her touch sparking a cascade of lights. "This is what remains of my people's legacy," Zara said, her voice filled with an unsettling reverence. "What you see here is a map of the galaxy, of the Xylith people, and the secrets we once held." Marcus stepped forward, his curiosity pushing past his wariness. He scanned the holographic display, his gaze tracing the patterns that shifted and swirled before him. There were constellations he didn't recognize, coordinates that defied understanding. The map was beautiful, complex beyond comprehension, but Marcus felt a chill settle deeper into his bones. "And what's the point of all this?" he asked, though part of him already feared he knew the answer. Zara's gaze turned to him, her expression unreadable. "The plague, Marcus. It was not an accident." Her words hung in the air like a warning, the weight of them pressing down on his chest. He blinked, confusion clouding his thoughts. "What do you mean? The plague? Everyone thought it was some natural disaster, a mutation of a virus." "The truth is far darker than you can imagine," Zara whispered, her voice trembling with something close to sorrow. "It was engineered. The Xylith were the target. A weapon meant to eradicate us, but it spread. It consumed everything. The humans, the other species that lived here, none were spared." Marcus recoiled, his mind struggling to process her words. "A weapon? Are you saying someone deliberately—" Zara nodded. "Yes, but it was not just the plague that wiped us out. The aftermath, the destruction of our kind, it was only the beginning." She turned away from the console, her eyes narrowing with what Marcus could only describe as a mix of determination and sorrow. The true purpose of the weapon was not to eradicate us. It was to make sure that no one could ever rise again, not just the Xylith, but all species that could challenge the balance of power in the galaxy. Marcus's pulse quickened, his hand instinctively moving to the plasma torch at his side. "Who would do something like that?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Zara looked at him, her expression unreadable. "You will learn that soon enough, but first—" She paused, as if gathering the weight of a decision she had been avoiding. She turned to him fully, her eyes locking onto his with an intensity that took his breath away. "There is one final task, Marcus," she said, the words hanging heavily between them. "A task that can save what is left of my people. A task that I can only accomplish with your help." Marcus narrowed his eyes, a growing sense of dread creeping into his stomach. What kind of task? Zara stepped closer, her voice dropping to a soft murmur, though it felt like she was speaking directly to his mind. I need you to father a child. The words hit Marcus like a physical blow, knocking the wind from his chest. He blinked, unsure if he had heard her correctly. A child? He repeated, his voice thick with disbelief. Yes, she said, her gaze unwavering. My species can no longer reproduce on our own. We are sterile, the last remnants of a civilization dying slowly. But there is hope. In you. Marcus stumbled back, his mind racing to catch up. His first instinct was to laugh, to dismiss her as mad. But something about her unwavering gaze, the weight of the situation pressing in on him, told him she was far from delusional. You want me to what? He demanded, his voice rising. You're asking me to have a child with you? Are you out of your mind? Zara didn't flinch. Instead, she met his outburst with calm assurance. It is not just for me, she said, her voice softer now, almost pleading. It is for my people, for the galaxy. The child that you and I would create will be the key to saving everything. Marcus took a step back, his hand tightening around the plasma torch. His mind screamed for him to walk away, to run back to the Aegis Dawn and leave this place behind. But something in Zara's eyes, the raw, desperate need for survival, pulled at him. He wanted to say no. He wanted to reject this absurdity outright. But a nagging thought crept into his mind. What if she was telling the truth? What if, somehow, this hybrid child really was the key to saving more than just her people, but the galaxy itself? As if sensing his hesitation, Zara stepped forward again, her voice softening, though the intensity of her plea never wavered. You are the only one left who can help us, the only one who can fulfill the prophecy. Before Marcus could respond, a sudden, sharp signal interrupted their conversation, a shrill noise cutting through the air. The scanners on his suit flashed to life, the warning light pulsing urgently. Something was coming. Zara's eyes widened in sudden alarm. They're here, she whispered. The ones who have been watching us. The hairs on the back of Marcus' neck stood on end. His heart raced as the chill of impending danger seeped into his bones. The shadows outside the biodome shifted, and a low hum, distant but growing closer, began to vibrate through the air. Marcus reached for the plasma torch at his side, his gaze never leaving Zara. Who are they? What do they want? They want to stop us, she said, her voice filled with cold certainty. And they will do whatever it takes to keep the truth buried. The ground trembled beneath their feet, the sound of engines now unmistakable in the distance. The clock was ticking. The humming grew louder, vibrating through the walls of the biodome, reverberating in Marcus's chest. He felt the pulse of the sound in his bones, a warning, a prelude to something terrible. It was coming, and whatever it was moving fast. Zara's eyes, once serene and composed, now flickered with panic. She darted toward the console, her slender fingers flying over the controls. The air around them thickened, charged with an energy Marcus couldn't place. Who are they? He demanded, his voice tight with urgency. He took a step forward, hand gripping the plasma torch in readiness. What do they want from you? From me? Zara didn't answer at first. Her eyes were fixed on the readouts flashing rapidly before her, scanning, calculating. The seconds stretched like thin strands of tension between them. And then, without warning, her fingers stilled. They are the gatekeepers, she said, her voice barely a whisper, as though the words themselves could summon the danger. The ones who control the galaxy's fate, the ones who destroyed my people. The shock of her words hit Marcus like a fist. He blinked, trying to wrap his mind around the weight of them. The gatekeepers? He repeated. What the hell does that mean? Zara turned, her gaze fixed on him with an intensity that seemed to pierce right through him. They are not human, nor are they any other species you know. They exist in the spaces between life and death. They monitor the balance of power. They decide who survives. And they know what I've done, what I intend to do. The last words hung between them, heavy and cold. "You're talking about the plague," Marcus murmured, his mind clicking through the fragments of information he had gathered. This wasn't just some natural disaster. The plague was designed to wipe out the Xylith, all of you. And you say it was the gatekeepers who did it? Zara's face tightened, her eyes shadowed with the grief of her people's extinction. She nodded. Yes, and they will do everything in their power to make sure the Xylith do not rise again. Not through me, not through you, not through our child. Marcus swallowed, trying to steady his pulse. His gaze flicked toward the entrance to the biodome, where the shadows had deepened unnaturally. It wasn't just the dimming light of the setting sun. Something was closing in. "What can we do?" Marcus asked, his voice hoarse. "How can we stop them?" Zara took a slow, deliberate breath, her eyes narrowing as she stood taller, her ethereal presence now imbued with a quiet resolve. "We cannot stop them, not directly. The gatekeepers are beyond our reach, but there is something you can do. The child, your child, it is the key." Marcus felt a chill spread across his skin. "I'm still not sure I understand. You're asking me to father a child with you so that we can fight back against these gatekeepers? And you say this child has powers? Powers that could change everything?" Zara met his gaze. "Yes, powers that could shift the balance. This child will be unlike any other, Marcus. The Xylith were the guardians of knowledge, of power. Our minds, our abilities, they were the foundation upon which peace and order were built. But we were too weak. We were divided. The plague, the weapon that destroyed us. It was designed to cripple the Xylith's influence, to silence the one thing that could prevent the chaos that's coming." The air around them seemed to grow colder, and Marcus could see his breath misting in the dim light. The hum of the energy outside had grown deafening, and his hands gripped the plasma torch so tightly that his fingers began to ache. "What chaos?" he asked, though he already feared the answer. "The galaxy is on the brink of collapse," Zara said, her voice laced with a mix of sorrow and fury. "The gatekeepers control everything, Marcus. They control the flow of life and death. They decide who gets to thrive and who fades into oblivion. They manipulated the galaxy's balance for centuries, letting empires rise and fall, manipulating the flow of resources, the evolution of species. But they were never truly threatened. Until now." Zara took a step closer to him, her form shimmering like a mirage. "But your child, the hybrid child, will possess the power to undo the gatekeeper's influence. The child will be a vessel, an embodiment of both Xylith wisdom and human strength. A being that can rewrite the balance, that can awaken the dormant forces hidden across the galaxy." Marcus shook his head, trying to process the impossible. "You're telling me I'm supposed to father a child with you, a species I don't understand, with abilities I can't even fathom, and this child will somehow be the key to stopping a shadowy cabal of godlike beings?" His voice was rising now, a mixture of incredulity and fear. He had thought he understood the stakes when Zara first spoke to him, but this was something else entirely. "Yes," Zara answered simply. "The child must be born, and the balance must shift." Before Marcus could respond, a sudden burst of static erupted from his comms. Astra's voice crackled through, distorted and urgent. "Marcus, there's an incoming ship." The words barely made sense through the interference, but the panic in Astra's tone was unmistakable. "It's not registered, not human. It's a warship of some kind. They're already here." Marcus felt a cold rush of adrenaline as the weight of her words hit him. His heart raced, and for a moment he thought his pulse might drown out the sound of the humming energy that filled the air. "They're coming for us," Zara said, her voice dropping to a hushed whisper. "The gatekeepers' agents. They won't allow you to leave here. They can't afford to let you go, to let this child be born." Marcus's mind raced, 1,000 questions and fears colliding. There was no time left to think, No time to make sense of what had just been revealed. The biodome's doors slammed shut with a metallic shriek, and the ground beneath their feet trembled violently. The warship was close, its engines growling like a beast in the darkness. Zara's expression hardened as she turned to Marcus. "They know about you. They know about the child. You need to leave now, before it's too late." "I'm not leaving without you," Marcus said, his voice firm despite the terror rising inside him. "We can figure this out. Together." Zara's eyes softened for a brief moment, but the tension in her posture never wavered. "It's too late for us, Marcus, but it's not too late for the child. If they take you, all hope will be lost." Suddenly, the door to the biodome shuddered violently, the lock beginning to twist and groan under immense pressure. The hum outside had turned into a full-blown roar, a predatory sound that seemed to tear at the fabric of the air around them. The gatekeepers were here, and they were coming for Marcus. Zara reached out and pressed her palm to his chest, a surge of energy pulsing between them. "Go. Now." Marcus hesitated, but only for a heartbeat. There was no more time. He sprinted toward the exit, his breath ragged in his chest, as the sounds of the warship's approach crescendoed into a deafening climax. The ground trembled beneath Marcus's boots, the echo of the warship's descent reverberating through the air like a death knell. His heart pounded in his chest, adrenaline coursing through his veins, but there was no time to think. Only action. He sprinted through the labyrinth of abandoned halls, his breath ragged, his senses heightened. Behind him, Zara's words echoed in his mind. "If they take you, all hope will be lost." The weight of her plea hung heavy on his shoulders, but the pounding of the warship's engines was growing louder, closing in, and every corner of the station seemed to shudder under the immense pressure of their arrival. Marcus's hand tightened around the plasma torch at his side as he rounded a corner and skidded to a stop. The door to the station's launch bay loomed ahead, half open, its hydraulic systems struggling to stay functional. He pushed forward, the door barely wide enough for him to squeeze through, but he didn't hesitate. His mind was a blur of thoughts, his feet moving on instinct, driven by a singular need to escape. The launch bay was empty, the remnants of long-forgotten supplies scattered about. A single craft stood at the far end, the Aegis Dawn, his ship, his lifeline. It was his only chance now. But as Marcus sprinted toward the ship, a sense of foreboding seized him. The air was thick with the unmistakable hum of energy, the same sound that had filled the biodome moments before the warship's arrival. He didn't know what was waiting for him outside the colony's walls, but he couldn't afford to waste any more time. "Go. Go now." Zara's voice whispered in his mind, her presence still lingering in the back of his thoughts, even as he reached the Aegis Dawn's hatch. He slapped his hand against the access panel, watching as the ship's systems came online in a flash of lights. But as the doors began to open, a sudden scream split the air. It wasn't a human cry. It wasn't even a sound that belonged to any species Marcus had encountered before. He froze, heart racing as the scream echoed through the bay. He looked around, trying to pinpoint the source, but there was nothing. The lights above flickered, casting long shadows across the empty space, and then, from the corner of his eye, he saw her. Zara stood at the edge of the bay, her ethereal figure shimmering in the dim light. But something was different. Her face was drawn tight with pain, her eyes wide with something that wasn't fear, something darker. Her normally serene demeanor had shifted, replaced by an expression Marcus had never seen before. It was desperation. "Zara!" he shouted, running toward her, his mind spinning with questions. "What's happening? What's going on?" She didn't respond immediately. Instead, her gaze darted to the ceiling, to the flickering lights above. Then, in a voice laced with something far colder than he had ever heard, she spoke. "They are here." The words fell heavily between them, like the toll of a bell marking the beginning of something irreversible. Marcus's pulse quickened as the warship's engines roared louder, the bay's walls now trembling under the pressure of its descent. He could hear the unmistakable sound of boots, heavy, deliberate steps, moving through the corridors. Soldiers, and they weren't human. The gatekeepers had sent their agents, and they were closing in. Zara turned to face him, her eyes flashing with urgency. "You must leave. Now, the gatekeepers will not allow you to leave this place. They will take you, Marcus. You must choose, escape, or stay and fight for a future that may never come." A cold sweat broke out on Marcus's brow as he stood frozen in place. The choice before him was suffocating, a weight that threatened to crush him where he stood. His mind screamed at him to run. He had to escape, to save himself, to survive. But Zara's words lingered in his mind like a venomous whisper. The child must be born. His eyes darted between Zara, her face filled with a quiet sorrow, and the distant sound of the agents closing in. He was trapped in a moment of impossible choices, the tension like a knot tightening in his chest. Escape, or sacrifice everything for a future he didn't understand? "What about you?" Marcus finally managed to speak, his voice hoarse. "You can't stay here. They'll destroy everything." He could feel the weight of his words pressing on him, the unspoken fear that if he left now, he would never know if the prophecy was true, if the child could truly change the fate of the galaxy. Zara didn't flinch at his words. Instead, she stepped forward, her expression softening for the briefest of moments. "I have given everything, Marcus, my people's survival, my existence. It all hinges on what you choose now. You must go." A harsh voice echoed through the bay, distorting the air as it carried through the station's shattered communication systems. "We know you are here, Zara, and we know you have him. We will not allow you to escape." Marcus's heart pounded in his chest, the words ringing in his ears. The gatekeepers had found them. It was no longer a question of if. They were coming, and they would stop at nothing to prevent Zara from fulfilling whatever plan she had for him. "Marcus." Zara's voice was small now, the calm she had once projected slipping away into something more vulnerable. "You must choose now. The child must live. I cannot let them erase everything we have fought for." Marcus stood in the center of the bay, his breath catching in his throat. His eyes flicked from Zara to the distant rumble of the warship, and then back to her. His instincts screamed at him to run, to take the ship and leave this cursed place behind. But the reality of what Zara was asking of him clawed at his mind. The child, the future, everything. Could he live with himself if he left now? Could he walk away from the only hope the galaxy had left? The warship's engines grew louder, the sound now deafening, and with it, a piercing, unnatural scream that echoed from the depths of the station. There was no time. Zara's hand gripped his arm with an unexpected urgency, pulling him toward her. "Marcus, listen to me," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I need you. We need you. Without the child, everything is lost." In that instant, everything fell into place. The choice, the sacrifice, the life that awaited them, the fate of a species, and perhaps an entire galaxy, rested in his hands. Marcus took a deep breath, his chest tightening. There was only one choice left. "I won't leave you," he said, his voice steady despite the storm raging inside him. As the warship's shadow loomed closer, as the footsteps of the gatekeepers echoed through the halls, Marcus made his decision. He was staying, and there would be no turning back. The battle had ended, or at least it had taken the shape of something neither Marcus nor Zara could have predicted. As the walls of the station trembled under the weight of the warship's final assault, the air around them thick with tension, the final pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. The gatekeepers had not come for Zara. They had come for something else, something far more dangerous. Marcus's chest rose and fell with each labored breath as he crouched beside Zara in the heart of the abandoned colony. His mind was a whirlwind of thoughts, emotions, and revelations. The warship had landed only moments before, and from its depths, strange shadowed figures had emerged, figures that defied all logic, whose presence seemed to bend the very air around them. But it wasn't their weapons or their vast, unknowable power that had shaken Marcus to his core. It was the truth about the child, about his role in all of this. The child they had been speaking of, the one that could reshape the future of the galaxy, was not an abstract hope. It was already growing, inside Zara. The revelation had struck him like a force of nature, an overwhelming truth that tore through the veil of mystery. Zara had never asked him to father the child to save her species alone. No, the child was meant to be the key, the beacon that would unite the splintered races of the galaxy against the unseen force controlling them. The gatekeepers weren't merely guardians of the galaxy's balance. They were manipulators, puppeteers, who had pulled the strings of empires for millennia. But Zara's people, the Xylith, had once been the only species to rival them. And Marcus? He was more than just a catalyst for the prophecy. He was the conduit. As the rumbling of the warship's engines receded into the distance, leaving an oppressive silence in its wake, Marcus turned his gaze to Zara. Her skin shimmered like starlight against the dying embers of the station's flickering lights. But there was no serenity in her expression now. She stood with her arms wrapped tightly around herself, her eyes distant, as if she were searching the dark recesses of time itself for answers. "How long?" Marcus whispered. "How long have you known?" Zara didn't look at him at first. She simply stood there, the weight of her decision pressing down on her as much as it had on him. When she finally spoke, her voice was low, a quiet resignation in the darkness. "From the moment I saw you, Marcus," she said, "I knew." Her words were a knife in the silence, each syllable precise and heavy. He had thought they were partners in this, sharing the weight of the unknown together. But Zara had carried this knowledge alone, the burden of a galaxy's future resting in the cradle of a life that had yet to be born. Marcus swallowed, trying to steady himself as he processed the weight of it all. The future of a species, of countless species, hinged on the child Zara carried. The gatekeepers had tried to destroy her people, and in their effort to erase her kind, they had unwittingly set the stage for their own downfall. But the struggle was far from over. The gatekeepers still watched from the shadows, manipulating every move, orchestrating every conflict to ensure that nothing, not even the child, could stop them. Marcus took a step toward her, his mind a whirl of conflicting emotions. "What now?" he asked, his voice raw, the exhaustion of their ordeal hanging in the air between them. "The warship is gone, but they're still out there. They won't stop." "No," Zara said softly, her gaze meeting his for the first time in what felt like forever. "They won't. But they are not invincible. The child, our child, will awaken forces that have been dormant for centuries. The key is in the birth, Marcus. The birth will spark something they can't control." Marcus's chest tightened. "And you? What happens to you?" She hesitated, and for a fleeting moment, the weight of her own sacrifice seemed to flicker across her features. "I will fade," she said, as if it were the simplest truth in the world. "The Xylith have always known this. Our kind cannot survive in a galaxy built on such imbalance. But the child, our child can. The child will transcend what was and lead us to what should be." The words seemed to hang in the air, so final, so definitive. He had thought their struggle would be against the warship, against the enemies who had hunted them through the depths of the galaxy. But the true battle was not a physical one. It was a battle of ideologies, a battle for control of the very essence of life, of power, of knowledge itself. Marcus's mind raced as he took in Zara's words. He thought of the child growing within her, of the immense power it would wield, the forces that would be set in motion once it was born. And yet, something inside him resisted. The weight of the sacrifice, of Zara's inevitable fate, of the life they would bring into this fractured galaxy, seemed almost too much to bear. "You don't have to do this alone," he said, his voice soft but determined. "I'm here. I won't leave you." Zara looked at him then, her expression softening, a single tear slipping down her cheek, though her eyes were filled with something more, a recognition of the bond they had shared and the road they had traveled together. For the first time, she allowed herself to lean into his presence, the flickering light of hope reflected in her eyes. "I never thought I'd be able to let anyone in again," she whispered. "But now I can see the path ahead. And it's because of you, Marcus." Her words settled between them, carrying the weight of something eternal. The warship had gone, the gatekeepers momentarily thwarted, but there was no illusion of peace. The fight was just beginning, and the future was uncertain. Yet in the silence that followed, as the remnants of the colony lay still around them, Marcus felt the stirrings of something, hope, perhaps, or a spark of belief that no matter how dark things seemed, the future was still theirs to shape. The sound of distant engines echoed through the open spaces, but it wasn't the hum of the warship. It was the Aegis Dawn, his ship, their ship, ready to take them to the next phase of their journey. There would be no simple resolution, no easy victory, but there was a chance to fight back, to change the course of history. And for the first time in what felt like an eternity, Marcus Ellis allowed himself to believe that they could win. He extended his hand toward Zara, offering the final unspoken promise that whatever came next, they would face it together. "Let's go," he said, his voice steady now, the weight of the future resting firmly in his grip. Zara took his hand, and together they stepped into the uncertain future, ready to face the forces that awaited them, knowing that they had already become part of something greater than themselves. The child would lead them, and so the galaxy would change.